Welcome to reFRAMED, a podcast created to educate, encourage, and inspire parents and professionals. The research is clear. Parenting a child that has a history of loss, abuse, neglect, or trauma requires parenting skills and insight to be reframed. We partner with child welfare experts to bring you evidence-based and research-driven information. reFRAMED host Emily Morehead, LPC, and guests strive to make an impact on our world by creating conversations about topics that are important to you, your family, and our communities.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of reFRAMED. My name is Emily Morehead, and I'm your host. Today I'm joined with Bill Porter, who is the Director of Post-Adoption. Bill, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I'm the Director of Post-Adoption at Gladney. I've been at Gladney since 2013 and just provide post-adoption support to families, to adoptees, to birth mothers. I'm celebrating my 22nd year in the field in counseling and working with different populations. My first job was working at a drug and alcohol center 22 years ago, so it's hard to believe that it's been that long. But it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Bill, one of your passions is helping people understand their neurobiology. So tell me why that became a passion of yours.
So, to be honest with you, I got my master's in counseling at UNT probably about 12 years ago, and it was a great program. We learned about, how to really support clients in need, provide empathetic listening, but there really wasn't anything about trauma, neurochemistry, neurobiology. We really didn't study any of that, and just probably in the last 10 years, through the work of Dr. Karen Purvis, Dr. Bruce Perry, did the concept of neurobiology really become one of my passions. And a lot of it is just the understanding of, when we talk about depression or we talk about anxiety or we talk about maladaptive behaviors, understanding the root of all that and where it comes from. It's our neurochemistry, it's the neurons, it's the early pathways that we're creating in our childhood that then play out in problematic ways. And so for me, I was trying to address some of the issues, but I didn't really understand the root. And so really going back and learning more and more about neurobiology is just fascinating to me. It just gives me so much more insight and understanding as to why, we have trouble with relationships, or why, sometimes managing our emotions are difficult. All those things that, people are always trying to address, but in some ways they're addressing it sort of like kind of like a Band-Aid without really going to the true wound. So that's where it all kind of started, and it's still a very, very big part of my passion, and also how I help people, how I serve people who are in need.
It seems like counseling and science don't always merge together, right? That counseling is more feely, science is more like logic, and so it's kind of a merging of the both worlds to understand the holistic picture of who we are as humans. So tell me a little bit about what neurobiological stress would look like if we were thinking about ourselves or a client that we were serving.
Sure. So anytime that you go through what I would consider a hard time, a difficult time, something that takes you out of your ordinary, takes you into a more survival mentality, our bodies are designed to deal with that physiologically. So it doesn't matter, even though it doesn't matter. Moving, traveling, anytime that you do something that's out of the ordinary, it puts a neurological stress on you. The reason that it's stressful is you have to understand what our neurology likes. Our neurobiology likes repetition. It likes things to be the same. What happens is, as we do the same things over and over again, sort of neural highways get formed in our brain or in our neurology. And when I say neurology, I want to make sure I explain this correctly. It's not just our brain. Our neurology is made up of our frontal cortex, which is the front part. It also involves our limbic system. It involves our brain stem. There's also involves our gut. There's tons of neurons in our gut. And then obviously it goes through the rest of our body. So when we're talking about the neurological system, we may think our brain, but that's actually just one part of it. And so our neurology likes repetition because what happens is, as you get repetition and consistency in our neurology, we start developing these neural highways of pathways of neurons that are consistent. The way you drive to work, the way you make your coffee, the way you dress in the morning, the way you fix your hair, all that repetition creates neurological highways in our mind and in our brain, in our body. The way you hit a baseball, that's all neurological pathways. I mean, it's repetition. So anytime that we're thrown off, that our rhythm is thrown off, that our repetition is thrown off, what happens is our neurology responds in a stress response. It actually kind of runs all through our amygdala, and our amygdala sort of says, which is sort of the fight, flight, or freeze response in our brain, sort of says something's different here. This isn't the same. And so any stressful event, doesn't matter what it is, the death of somebody, an illness, anything that has stress to it, our amygdala sort of says, okay, we need to prepare for this. Kind of the, winter is coming type response. And so what happens is our neurology changes. And for each person, it's different. For some people, the excitatory sort of neurotransmitters and sort of stress hormones rush through their body. And so their neurological response is to be more prepared, ready to kind of fight or more anxious, manic, more emotions. For other people, it could be the inhibitory, almost like the systems kind of starts slowing down, where you almost feel like under neurological stress, you may feel almost like you have a cloudy mind, like you can't think straight. Or it may feel like you're almost like disassociating, like pulling away. And then obviously the other ones may have sort of a kind of a mixture, but a more flight response. Instead of a getting ready to fight, it's more of the, I need to get away. And so our neurology is just literally like, I'm trying to avoid everything. I want to get away from everything I can. And so we notice this in different parts of our body. So it's not just in our brain that we experience neurological stress, because we do have that. We have racing thoughts or we have cloudy thoughts. But also can be in our emotions. We have heightened emotions, we have strong emotions, or maybe we're numb emotionally. Maybe we don't have any responses emotionally. Or maybe it also can involve our body. Like, how is our body responding? For example, a great one is like digestion. How are we digesting? Most of the time when children are under stress, if you pay attention, most of them get diarrhea. And the reason is because our neurology is on a heightened alert, and digestion has become less important to a surviving body. And so now the body is saying, okay, digestion's not that important. We have to survive. We got to get ready for the fight, flight, or freeze. So now digestion is less important. And all of a sudden, all the neurochemistry in our gut is literally saying, I don't know what to do with all this. So it's just kicking the food out, and saying, we don't have time to digest this. And next thing you know, now our body is responding to stress. The way we sleep at night, some people are more sleepy and some people are less sleepy. I know for me, when I'm under stress, I can't sleep. I get up at 5 a.m, 4 a.m, I wake up and all of a sudden my brain is racing. And that's basically our neurology preparing for stress. It's an adaptive response. It's not bad. It protects us. It prepares us for what is to come. And so that's kind of how like, okay, something's going on, and that something is different, and my neurology can tell, and now I'm responding that way.
So how do we get assigned these patterns? So for example, there have been dangerous situations that I have had a fight response. Like I ran straight to the situation, wanted to handle it. And there's been another situation where I completely froze and just didn't handle it well. So how do these responses get assigned to us? Why does our body act this way?
Yeah, so I mean, that is a great question. And I think there's a couple answers to the question. The first thing is, all of this goes all the way back to our childhood, the way that we were engaged with, because really our neurology was really set up by our parents. In those first few years is where our neurological systems were taught, do we need to get excited? How do we calm ourselves? There's a concept called the external regulator, where when our neurology gets sort of excited, the external regulator, who hopefully is our parents, teaches us how to calm our body, how to calm our neurology. And so for some people, if they didn't have an external regulator, then the neurology gets excitatory but doesn't know how to calm itself. And then that's how a neurobiology, if left to its own devices, can almost become too excitatory, overexcitatory. And quite frankly, problematic, that it's too wound up. But it all starts in our childhood. The ability to regulate emotions is a gift. The regulation of our emotions, the regulation of our neurobiology is a gift that's taught to us through our parents. It's something that we are gifted from our parents if they if we come from a good place, if we come from an ideal world. The truth is that for a lot of us, we may not have received that. We may not have had parents who were good at helping us regulate ourselves. And so then we move into stressful situations and our regulation management, our regulation skills is haywire. We don't have the neurobiological stress neurobiological ability to manage it. I like to think of this, and I don't mean to get too like garage talk, but I kind of picture this like an electrical system, that if you have an electrical system that's built with very fragile wires, and you put a really fast, hard charge on that electrical system, what happens to those wires is they literally fry because the stress is too much. And so you get this like, I can't manage this. Or in the opposite would be like if you had an electrical current that's really insulated with a lot of, I don't know, you could say rubber and plastic and just things that really don't allow that current to go through the system, then the system doesn't process the information correctly because it can't get the information. And so our neurons are pretty much the same, that sometimes if we have too much going on and our system can't manage it, it literally fries our brain. We can't manage it. Or sometimes we have so much insulation that we're just numb to it and we can't feel anything. And a lot of that has to do with our childhood. And so we carry that into our adult life. We think that we're growing up, but a lot of times those instinctual, physiological responses that show up in a time of crisis, they're not educated. They're not in the higher part of our brain. They're literally reactive. And we're talking about like our historic, prehistoric, survivalist, reptilian brain that pops out. A lot of times when you're in a survival thing, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I responded that way, right? Or I can't believe I did that. And what that is your frontal cortex trying to figure out what the heck your brainstem just did. And the reason why is because your brainstem is so reactionary and so quick to survive that it's functioning on a different set of beliefs, a different set of history, a different set than what you think your brain is. And so that's where we get those crazy responses. And I can't tell you, you're exactly right. I can't tell you how my response is going to be to a situation because that's my frontal cortex trying to figure it out. And in a reactionary crisis mode, guess what? This is offline. It's this part of my neurology.
It's survival. So how does this play in with mindfulness? Mindfulness is obviously a hot topic right now. I've seen 1,000 books called Mindful Parenting or Mindful Marriages or Mindful Relationships. How do these live together? Is there positives and negatives in that relationship? What does that look like?
Okay. So in a moment of challenge, in a moment of stress, in a moment of grief, in a moment of sadness, our neurobiology is going to, in a sense, react to its survivalist tendencies, to its sort of DNA code that sort of has a kind of a natural response. And my response obviously is different than your response. And that's actually good. The issue is that if not managed correctly, meaning the stress that we encounter isn't managed appropriately through our neurochemistry, what happens is our neurochemistry can become problematic. Our responses can be too aggressive. Our emotions can be too aggressive. We're in too much of a survivalistic mindset that the dumber part of our brain, which is sort of the brain stem and even the limbic system, is calling all the shots. And then next thing you know, there may be overreaction, there may be underreaction. There should be things you should be reacting to, and you're not because you're under that stress. And so the issue with those sort of natural responses is they can create damage. They create damage in your life in the sense that maybe you're yelling too much at people. Maybe you're yelling at the people you work with. Maybe you're yelling too much at your spouse. Maybe you're being too aggressive with the people around you because of the stress you're going through. Or maybe you're just indifferent and you don't even care. And so now things that you should be doing are not happening. And we all sort of give ourselves permission and we say, well, I'm surviving. So whatever happens, happens. Like that's the way it's gonna be, you know? Like you guys just have to deal with this. And although in the moment that makes sense, the long-term consequences are that we can really hurt and damage relationships. We can damage our job. We can damage our relationships with our neighbors. We can do a lot of damage to the people around us in these survival moments. And that's horrible, right? Because we know that we have a social brain, and the one thing that helps us get through stuff is each other. Like, we need a connection from each other to get through what it is. I need, my relationships to help me get through a hard time. And so it's horrible that the thing I need, I could potentially push away and damage and hurt. And then at the end of it, when it's not so much survivalist, now I'm looking at a mess in front of me and I'm going, this is horrible. What did I just do? Because now my frontal cortex comes online and I see all the damage. So mindfulness is the ability for my frontal cortex in a moment of crisis, in a moment of stress, to pause the system, to step back, to pull itself away and to assess itself and say, how am I doing? How am I reacting? What are my responses? And it's the mind's ability, it's fascinating because it's the mind's ability to assess itself. And it's a learned skill. And if you learn about child development, this is not something that a child can do because their frontal cortex isn't developed enough. It actually takes, probably more toward the 20s where you can really, probably even later than that.
I think they say 25, yeah.
Yeah, like maybe even like when you're a parent and you can see like, okay, there's a brain system here. It definitely happens when you get married too, because now someone else is saying your neurology is weird and you're like, oh, it is? I never thought about that. It's almost like your spouse becomes your first mindfulness and says, this isn't working well. But mindfulness is the ability of your brain to pull itself out, to create its mind's eye and to look at itself. And so it's super important because in that process, what you can do is you can mitigate damage. When you take a moment, and what I see this mindfulness, and there's a million different definitions to this, I see this mindfulness is us taking a neurological pause and stepping back, and it can be, and it usually has to be done alone, or maybe in the presence of maybe like a counselor, but in a very safe, secure moment, to pull ourselves away a little bit and process, how am I doing? How is my body doing? What kind of stress am I experiencing? What does this stress feel like? What are the emotions I'm going through? What are the emotions? And I start giving things name. What are the thoughts that are escaping me? How am I responding to this? Am I over responding? Am I under responding? And so to me, mindfulness is that neurological pause where we step away and we sort of do a self-assessment of our own neurology and saying, how am I hanging in here? And is very, very helpful. It's a learned response. Most of us don't necessarily do this, so it's something you have to practice and you have to be intentional about being mindful. But it really is that pause to say, let me assess myself with the intent of making sure that I'm not going to create long-term damage through this survival moment, through these hard times that are just kicking me in the butt, that I don't end up becoming my own worst enemy. That my own neurology in its survival mode doesn't become my worst enemy. That now, because see what happens is there was an original stress, the stressor of, you name it, grief, loss, losing a job, those things that are so painful. And what we never want is for us to, in moments of pain, that we go through so much pain that in a way to try to manage our own neurology, we actually create more pain for ourselves. This is a person who picks up drinking to deal with stress. They have just created so much more pain because of their response to stress than the original stress. This is where we get to sort of process this and say, okay, is there anywhere here where I'm actually becoming my own worst enemy? And if so, I need to figure out how to address it. And that's where mindfulness, that's the world that I believe mindfulness sort of fits in, is that moment to take that pause and assess.
It's that selection. I think, you lose something in your house, right? Like your car keys. And so you pause and you retrace your steps. So when I came in from the grocery store, I did this and this and this. It's that intentional choosing to look for what that root of behavior was. Because like you said, we can't choose how we were wired. That came to us by how we grew up and how our parents received our needs. But we can choose how we retrace those steps. And I like what you said. It's that intentional choosing of that and following that path to the why behind the behavior that we tell parents to do all the time for their kids. Why can't we do it for ourselves? I guess I'm interested in how our attachment styles lean to this. So you and I have very different attachment styles. We've had a lot of conversations about that. How does our attachment play into all of this wiring?
Yeah, so I think if I was going to sort of overlay attachment theory onto this, to make it simple is basically the question is, do I feel secure or do I feel insecure? A lot of this comes back to security. Sadly, what happens is in moments of stress, there's sort of a neurological search, if you will, to am I safe? Am I secure? And that neurological search, once again, falls back at the feet of our early parents or of our early caregivers. And for those people whose maybe caregivers were maybe abusive or at least maybe emotional and just emotionally charged, then when I take that sort of back to that question back of do I feel secure, a lot of times my answers will be no, I don't feel secure. I feel anxious. I feel scared. I feel emotional. I feel manic. Or in an insecure situation where I may take that question back of am I secure, and maybe I experience neglect, or I experience a parent who wasn't there for me emotionally, then I don't have a nice place to sort of go back and in my mind have that place where I go back and say, I'm scared, I'm hurting, I'm alone. And then basically because I didn't have anyone there to sort of help me manage my emotions, I'm just left with emptiness. I'm just left with this sort of neglect. There's no answers, there's no questions. And then that just creates sort of despondency or feelings of helplessness, because I'm like, well, what do I do with this? What do I do with this anger? What do I do with this fear? What do I do with this grief? How do I manage it? And so attachment, our early relationships really set the stage for us to be able to say, like, you know what, it's going to be okay. If you hear what I'm about to say, it literally is the sound, it's like the words that a parent should say to a child when they're hurting, like, it's going to be okay. Like, we're going to get through this. I love you. You're important. Like, hang in there. You're not alone. Like, you're experiencing emotions. Like, you're angry right now. It's okay. You're scared. Like, these are the words that our parents tell us that then play out in our lives throughout the rest of our life, right? And so when we're talking about stressful times, things that are really scary, we go back to those messages of like, am I safe or am I not? Do I feel secure or not? And sadly, for many of us, we don't have that history. We don't have those stories of parents who were secure to us. We may have stories of pain. We may have stories of neglect. We may have stories of parents who are real good at meeting our physical needs, but they were horrible at meeting our emotional needs. And so then what happens is our emotions are crazy, or we don't even know how to feel. And all that, if not resolved, takes a toll on us. It takes a toll on our relationships. It takes a toll on the way I interact with my kids. It plays a part in how and so although it may seem irrelevant, like, what does my childhood have to do with the stress that I'm dealing with today at 40? And what I'll tell you is it has everything to do with it. Because your responses to your stress, whether neurologically or even your attachment style, is basically determined early on in that part of life. Now, there is a side note to this. That's if it's not addressed or discovered or is not looked at or unpacked. That's if left to our own devices, that's what happens. But through mindfulness, through counseling, through all the things that people do as they go through self-help, they go through, spiritual journeys, they go through emotional journeys, they get married and all of a sudden they have all this stuff that they didn't realize they had. All that begins to address those things to better prepare us for the stress, to change our trajectory, to change our story. If unaddressed, then the consequences are going to be there. But luckily, boy, that's what healing's about, right? Like that process of growing and journeying.
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan of therapy for that. It's instrumental. And my next question was how we do that for our children if it hasn't been done for us. So, in times of crisis, typically the whole family unit is experiencing that. In times of crisis, we're putting it together for our kids, are putting on that face. How do we create that felt safety for people that we love? It doesn't have to be our kids. It can be our parents. It can be our grandparents. It can be our partner. How do we create that felt safety if we haven't necessarily experienced it before?
Yeah. Well, and that's the work, right? Like that's where the work comes in. And the work, kind of a couple things that I want to share. The first one is just vulnerability. That as we experience pain, or as we experience grief, or we just experience chaos. I mean, maybe there's things where it's not just one thing. It's like just, it's one thing after another. The first thing is we just have to, in that mindfulness, we need to take the pause, and we just need to be vulnerable and honest. We need to just say, okay, I'm struggling. This is hard. An unlabeled emotion will wreak havoc on a neurological system. Like, we have to label our emotions. We have to give them names. We have to express them. We have to talk about them. We have to bring them to life. And in that vulnerability, what happens to our neurology is really fascinating. It's like this, it's almost, the way I can explain it is like you're jumping on lily pads. You're jumping on lily pads trying to survive. And then when you take a moment and you're like, enough, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. Then all of a sudden you begin to sink. And then you sort of like, okay, what's real? And then what you want to find is bottom. You want to find truth. You want to find the real. Like, if I'm really hurting and I'm acting like I'm not hurting, I'm not doing myself any favors at all by acting like I'm not hurting. If I'm really scared, but I'm so afraid of what that means to feel that feeling, and I'm just going around like not expressing or experiencing that emotion, like it's plain, like it's seeping through my pores. My fear is seeping through my pores. Everybody can feel it, but the only person who's afraid to really experience that is me. And so my job is to say, okay, you know what? Forget it. All bets are off. Everything, it doesn't matter. I need to go to where I am. I need to be honest. I need to go to the truth, which is really fascinating because that's one of the first steps of attachment, is like, be honest. Like, what is going on? What are the messages in your brain? Are they saying you're safe, or are they saying they're not safe? And just speaking those things into reality. And then as you become vulnerable with truth and what's actually happening, then you better very quickly follow it up with love and grace. Like, you don't get to just be vulnerable and then be like, oh, like I can't do this. I don't know what I'm just done. And then your mind be like, yeah, you're right. You're done. There's nothing you can do. Give up. Because that's not how our systems work. Our systems work is that once we find safety and vulnerability, then we basically follow it up with like love, with compassion for ourselves, and saying, you know what, Emily, you're right. Like, you're scared, and I get that. But you know what? There's a bigger story here of security. There's a bigger story of safety. And the thing about it is we kind of have to look outside of ourselves for the messages that are in the universe, the messages of the people who do love us, the messages of the people who really do care about us, those specific people who maybe it wasn't your parents, but somebody hopefully came along in your life that created a message that you matter, that you have value, that your value is not just based on your education or your job or your, what title you have, that your value is more internal than that. This is where we may find like a spiritual journey where, like, Wayne Dyer talks about the source, Alcoholics Anonymous talks about, the higher power, where there's something outside of ourselves that's bigger. And what that is love and grace. And so I have to become vulnerable and be honest. But then I have to make sure that I follow that up with the message that says, Bill, you're going to be okay. And most of the time, if I didn't have a good childhood, that's not an internal message. I have to go look for that message outside. I have to go and find people who are going to sort of instill in me a value, a hope, a love, a grace for myself that I wasn't gifted in my childhood, that I wasn't gifted in those early years. And so if you look at my personal life, it's been certain friends, it's been counselors, it's been pastors, it's been random people who have just come in moments of crisis and have just kind of held me up and walked me through those things. And so in that moment, I need to make sure that I'm listening to those people. Like, you're not doing yourself any good if in moments of vulnerability you follow it up with self-criticism and self-doubt and you just confirm all the fears you have. Like, this is the discipline of mindfulness, is that I make sure I'm listening to the right people, that I make sure that I'm replaying the right messages in my mind to say, you matter, you have hope. Do not look at your current circumstances as a definition of your future. Do not look at, even some of the messages that people tell you in position of power. Maybe it's your boss. Sometimes it could even be your spouse that you have to be like, okay, she's having a bad time. Like, I have to be able to pull myself back and say, even though she may not be experiencing me as a positive person right now, like, That's not the end all be all. Like, if I'm going to do this well, if I'm going to get my neurology online to be able to manage what's in front of me, I have to follow up vulnerability with love and grace. And that's sort of the journey.
Brené Brown said, the last thing that you need in the middle of vulnerability is shame for being a human. And I thought that was so good, because when we do explore vulnerability, it brings out some dark, dark features. And so just to like look at them and say, oh, this is what it is. And it's okay that that's what it is. This is the experience that I'm having. And it's okay that I'm feeling angry, sad, scared. Feelings are for feeling, Glennon Doyle Melton says. And I love that, because the feelings exist for a reason. I think naturally we as humans, when we feel something, we panic and we don't want to feel it. It feels yucky. It feels bad. Our neurology flips on and does fight, flight, or freeze, and we freak out. And basically what it is at the end of the day is you have to be brave enough to follow that feeling. You also have to be safe enough to do so. Like what you said, finding people in your life. And I know that there's a lot of viewers that may be watching this and just say, hey, I don't have anyone. I don't have anyone that I can have those experiences with. And that's when you and I both, I know, would recommend seeing a counselor and checking in with someone, because we all need a space to explore those feelings in a safe way. And we just might not have places in our life that we can do that.
So once we do that, then that's how we manage our kids. Remember your question, like, how do we manage our kids in the time of stress? It's you do that work internally, and then you're in the right place. You're in the right space to go back and be like, okay, now I have to help my kids in this time. I have to manage the people in my lives who are going through stress. All that stuff is where that happens. So, okay.
It's that oxygen mask, right? Like, I can't do it for my kids if I can't do it for myself. It's me first, and then it's them. And I think sometimes with our kids, they have such triggering behaviors that there is this point of exploration of like, man, why did that just get all over me in this experience? And so I think the mindfulness really does apply there too. Bill, what's one of your keys to exploring your neurology in a safe way? What would you leave viewers with? Maybe an exercise that you've done or a way that it's been impactful for you?
I'm gonna be real honest with you. It's not easy. You know, our minds are averse to pain. Like, we have a neurology that's averse to pain, and part of this is a little bit counterintuitive to be vulnerable. It's sort of the path. It's kind of, you kind of have to go through instead of around. But I do think that as I continue to just try to be honest, that I just be vulnerable to like the challenges of myself, of my own neurology, ways that maybe I'm not providing the safety to my children, to my wife, the things that I know are important in times of stress that they need. And so it's humbling, I'll be honest with you. When I take those moments to pause and look, I think the one thing I would encourage everyone is don't be afraid to seek the truth. I mean, the truth is none of us are perfect, and we all have stuff. And so you might as well just be honest about it, and follow it up with repair, with forgiveness and apologies, and, you know, being willing to not assume that you get it perfect, you know, not to assume that you have it figured out, and approach these anytime you're going through stress with compassion for yourself, and then also compassion for others, and forgiveness, honestly. And so if I could say anything, is just make sure you're starting by being truthful. It's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt when you realize, like, oh my gosh, my reaction to that was so over the top, or wow, I completely missed that. And that's hard, right? Like, to sit in that space of like, boy, I messed that up, or I do feel alone, or I do feel like, you know, and then to sort of, but in that truthfulness, then you begin to sort of be like, okay, well, let's figure out how to climb out of this. Let's figure out how to work through this. And what's so cool is, as you do that, the first time you face it, it's really heavy and hard, but then the more you kind of go down that road, then it's easier. It gets easier. It's like a journey of like, oh, truthfulness, repair, replace. Like, apologize. Okay, like, okay, I got to do that. Oh, I got to, okay. And then you start managing it. And then all of a sudden, what's fascinating is all that stuff that you went through in your early childhood, all those tendencies, all those behaviors, what actually happens is your neurology almost becomes free from those. They're no longer in so much control. You're no longer just reacting. One of the things that they talk about, like in the police department, if you're going to be in like an altercation, is you have to practice, like you have to do training, so that you have a different response than your fight, flight, or freeze response, right? Because you don't want officers who are running away or hiding. Like you need them to respond, and a lot of that comes with training. And it's the exact same recipe for our neurology. Like I have to train my neurology to go there. I have to train my neurology to help pick myself back up, and then I have to go and train my neurology to impact the people around me. And so all of that is a journey. And this process of being honest, of recognizing when I'm going through a hard time, of being willing to be vulnerable, and then following up with love and grace is going to take me the rest of my life to figure out. Like I'm literally just going to have to figure it out. Like it's going to be a journey, to still replace the old messages that I hear from my childhood, to replace the old scripts, to replace the old neurological systems of response that I have. And I just have to become a person who's constantly looking at it and growing, working through my demons, earning my security, like all those things is just part of the journey. And I'll tell you what, Emily, let me tell you the thing that I love. I love when I run across somebody else who's in the same journey. Oh, it just fills me, right? Like I'm just like, oh my gosh, like your vulnerability, the fact that you're willing to acknowledge like your own weaknesses, the fact that you have a skill set of apology, the fact that you don't feel like you're too good for this or you're above this process. Like anytime I find another surgeoner, like another person who's going along the journey, oh man, it just gives me so much hope, because I'm like, oh, I'm not the only one who's doing this. Oh, this is so great. Like we're gonna be okay. And I don't have to look at my current experiences to say that there's hope. I don't have to look at, like I said, whether my job, I don't have to look at my relationships. I can look at something deeper, and I can see it in the faces, in the eyes, and in the heart of the people that are also on this journey. And to me, I just love that part of it.
It's amazing. And I think that it really is one of those things of like, I've been doing the work intentionally for about 7 years, and there is freedom in someone else saying, I'm in the trenches daily and we'll figure it out one day, but not today. And there's grace in that. And I think that's amazing. And I really appreciate you, Bill, today kind of explaining to us the holistic picture of it, right? That there's not these just flying around emotions, that there's a root. Because I know with anxiety, a lot of times, really any emotional state that we have, it can feel so scary to not understand. And so I appreciate you giving us the whole picture today and helping us reframe our brains and how we look at it. Bill, can you tell our viewers how to stay in touch with you?
Sure. I mean, so, at Gladney, we have a lot of different trainings with Gladney University. And then also, obviously, on our website, Adoptions by Gladney, you can always come and, I'd love to interact with people. One of the things that we love is social media interaction here at Gladney. So it all goes through Gladney, but it's such a great opportunity. And Emily, thank you so much for having this conversation with me and for being a person who definitely participates in this journey as well.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And thank you guys for tuning into another episode of reFRAMED. For all of the resources that Bill has talked about today and the processes of attachment style and an image of your brain, you can check out your show notes, and we will have all of those linked for you so you can continue the work alongside Bill and I. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to reFRAMED. Visit gladneyuniversity.org to access the show notes and learn about upcoming trainings at Gladney University. We'd love your feedback, so please rate, review, and subscribe. Until next time.